Okay, this isn't going to be much of a surprise pattern. This is an old classic. It's going to be a flashback olive hare's ear. That's kind of what we're going to see when it's all said and done. I just kind of want to show you how I do it, the little spin that I put on it. This is probably one of the flies I fish probably more than anything. Whether I'm Euro nymphing, regular indicator nymphing, or whatever, I've pretty much always got an olive hare's ear on. I'll be honest, I don't fish it with the flashback as much, but almost every rig I have, I always fish with two nymphs. One of them, 99% of the time, is almost always an olive hare's ear. The other one is usually some form of a golden stonefly. I really don't change flies all that much. It's actually kind of funny. So I usually do these in a 16. But for video purposes, I'm going to go one step higher. So this is a size 14 curved nymph hook. I've got a tungsten bead on the end with some .02 lead-free wire on there. I'm going to use some A-Dot brown Vivus thread, and I'll get that started right here behind the weight. Get a few wraps in just to secure the tag end, and then I'm going to double back and get my thread in between all of those wraps of the wire. Get some thread in there. I'll double that back. And I'll go over, I like to go over this point here and pull back towards the front and lock that in. That'll secure that in rock solid. You don't need any glue or anything like that. That'll get that in there and that will never go anywhere. So now we're just going to do a few wraps down. And what I'm going to do before I get all the way to the back is I'm going to take this piece of pheasant tail here. And I'm going to rip off about 6-ish fibers or so. Another thing with the hare's ear, and I said in the beginning, the spin that I put on it, I definitely do my hare's ears a little bit different. If you see a traditional hare's ear, usually they use a tuft of actual hare's ear, the guard hairs for the tail. Or they just use, a big bushy tail. I just really have never understood that. That's essentially what I'm going to be using. I don't get the logic behind tying a mayfly nymph with a gigantic bushy tail. Does it catch fish? Yeah, I mean, it really does. But to be honest with you, there's a lot of flies that are really just a mess of dubbing that'll catch some fish for you. But this, a little bit less in the tail, will help it get down a little bit faster. It just seems a little bit more reasonable to me. So I don't go overboard on the tail. I'm going to keep that secure as I make my wraps, and that's essentially what we're going to have. That's what our tail is going to look like. Now, I like to make my thread wraps count. So now that that is tied in, on my way back up towards the front of the fly, I'm going to take some small gold wire, and I'm going to use that for my ribbing. Wire is very easy to tie in as you go towards the front of the fly. You don't really need to secure it or stabilize it or anything. So anytime I'm going back towards the front, that's when I like to wrap in my wire. So we'll get that all the way back up to where the weight is. Just lock that into my material holder, and let's get rid of those fibers there. Okay, so there's our tail and early prep for the body. Next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to dub the back end. But before we do that, I'm going to take some wraps about 1/3 of the way back down the body. Then I'm going to go back towards the front. Then I'm going to go 2/3 of the way down the body, back towards the front. And then I'm going to bring my thread this time all the way down to 1 or 2 wraps before we get to the tail. And that's just going to build up a little bit of a taper for me. That's going to help shape the body in a good way. Now, what I have here, I have a bag of olive hare's ear dubbing. Now, obviously, it's in a bag, but that's just because I do a lot of this all at once because I tie so many of these flies. I don't use pre-made dubbing. I use the actual hare's mask. So what I'll do is I'll take the hare's mask, I'll cut some guard hairs out, I'll cut some fur off of the face, some off of the ears, cut a few big tufts off, and then I'll take those and I'll throw them right in a coffee grinder and spin them up, and that'll give me, a nice fluffy dubbing blend that I can in turn use. And you can buy things of actual hare's ear dubbing, and it can be the natural stuff, but I really, really like just using the hare's mask. That's always been my favorite. So what I'm going to do, as always, is I'm going to get a nice tight dubbing noodle here. I'm not really going to go too crazy with overdubbing this or anything. Again, some hare's ears are really, really overdressed. And I know, actually, to be honest with you, that might be the original call for the pattern, but I don't know. I just I've had so much better success with tying it like a regular nymph, tightening up the body a little bit. The only place I use really some extra dubbing is to form the legs in the front of the fly, which I'll show you when we get to that point. But I've never tied these with all that extra material. I've just never understood it. Am I deviating from the original plan? Yeah, I guess. But that's why I said in the beginning, this is my spin on it. This is how I tie it. So now I'm going to take a couple of wraps, finishing it up at the tail. And by the time I get there, I should start having the dubbing hitting the body. So now we'll bring that back up towards the front. We're going to maintain that taper. That tapered underbody should really guide your dubbing, and it should really help your body take the shape that you want. But every once in a while, you might get a wrap or two of some dubbing that might throw it out of whack. And if that's the case, just fix it. That's why I always say use a tight, small dubbing noodle. That way you can fix any mistakes as you go up. You know, if there's a low spot, just fill it in. If you see that you got a big chunk there, kind of skip over it. Just maintain that taper as you go up the body. So right now we kind of ran out a little bit, so I'll load this back up with a few twists of dubbing. And this is really not a difficult fly to tie at all. This is like one of the earliest flies that most people are instructed to try when they learn how to tie, so you shouldn't have any trouble at all if you like this style to replicate this fly. And we're going to bring... There, that looks pretty good. I'll close that off with some wraps. Body's a little thicker than we might want, but when you start wrapping the ribbing through, it'll mash that down a little bit. And the ribbing is really important because the fur off the hare's ear, the fibers are not particularly long. So you're not really getting much holding that dubbing onto the thread. So this ribbing really, really helps. So make sure that's ribbed nicely. Some people like to rib these with tinsel too. I like the wire. I'm really big on sink rate. If I'm going to fish nymphs, I want them to get down. I'm not going to toy around with a lot of stuff that is going to prevent them from getting down. So I like wire. Little chunk left there, but that's fine. I can just secure that and move on. Now, if you want, this is another thing that you can do. If you want, you can take a dubbing brush and you can stroke that towards the back and tease out some of that dubbing. But this fly is going to be plenty buggy enough. I don't really think you need to worry about doing any of that. But obviously you can if you'd like. So I'm going to go back to my pheasant tail here. And I'm going to rip off a more sizable chunk of fibers. I'm going to double that right up and make sure that we got a nice prominent wing case on there. That's kind of what I got. You can see how it kind of flares out a little bit. So I'm going to tie it in by the tips. Secure it. And we're good. Now, I also want to point out, if you are tying multiple flies, now right now I'm filming this, but if I was going to tie up, say, a dozen of these, what I tend to do is I will tie in my tail, and then I'll take the cutoffs from the tail and put them aside and tie the fly up until this point, and then half hitch, take it out of the vise. I'll start a totally new fly, and then when I tie the tail in on the second fly, I will cut the excess off again, and I'll take those two chunks of excess and combine them together and use that for my wing case. It's a huge material saver. With those two cutoffs of your pheasant tail to make your two tails, you can make wing cases for two more flies and waste almost no material at all. So that's what I like to do with these. I'll half hitch it, take it out of the vise, start a second fly, and then use those cutoff pieces for the wing case. So definitely works nice. Actually, you know what? I got in the middle of gabbing about that. I forgot that I was going to make this a flashback. So let me just undo a few of these wraps. It's really not going to be a problem. When I screw up like this on videos, I like to include it and not make a new video. A lot of times you see these things and you think, oh man, people making these videos tie these flies like it's nothing. Which, I don't know, in some cases maybe we do, but trust me, we make a lot of mistakes, and I choose to keep my mistakes in the videos. So, all right, so now let's backtrack a little bit. Remember, we're going to do this as a flashback. So I have a chunk of tinsel here, and because I want that to be on the very top of my wing case, that's also going to be the very first thing that I tie in. So I'll get that in. I'll pull this to get the length that I want. That looks good. We'll secure it. Notice how I still have the dubbing on my thread here. That's fine. I'm just going to keep moving it down. Okay, so now that we have the flashback in there, I'm going to take my wing case back out of the hackle pliers, put that on there, and then retie this. Keep moving my dubbing down because I want bare thread to really secure that. Get the excess out of there. Now, what I also want to point out, notice how when I'm securing these items, I'm not really bringing my thread all the way to the bead. There's a reason for that. What I want to do is I want to leave some space. I don't want to build up any thread buildup behind the bead, because I'm going to do something with that for the final step. So make sure that when you're securing everything, you're not going all the way to the bead, because you're going to need a little bit of extra space there. So we're going to wrap on some dubbing here to form the thorax. We'll get that wrapped up a little heavy right where the wing case is going to come over. Get that on there like that. Good. Okay, so we've got pretty much everything we need. The only thing we need is some legs and some bugginess. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my finger, I'm going to make a loop, and I'm going to wrap around and secure that loop. I'm not sure who's watching this. If you're an experienced tyer, you know that this is really just a simple dubbing loop. If you're a little bit new, and I wanted to make sure I included that because a hare's ear is a fly that a lot of beginner fly tyers can latch onto, something you're definitely capable of doing as an early tyer. So I don't know if there's experienced tyers or advanced tyer or beginner tyers watching this, so I wanted to include that. This is just your basic dubbing loop. Now, once you have your dubbing loop, I'm going to dig back into my dubbing, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to take some tufts like this, and I'm just going to kind of tease it out, get them aligned, and I want kind of a vertical chunk that looks a little bit like that, and I'm just going to slip that into my dubbing loop. Move that up. Some of that's not in there, so let's get all that secured. Now you're going to lose a lot of this when you spin it, so put in more dubbing than you think you're going to need, because you're definitely going to lose some. So there's my second bit. Get that spinning, get it all secured. If you don't have one of these dubbing twister tools, they're really, really useful. You should definitely get them. I mean, you can get by with just one that you hand twist on your own, but these ones that you spin save a lot of time. Okay, so now I'm going to take my hackle pliers. I'm going to transfer my thread into the pliers, get them off the dubbing twister, and I'm just going to wrap this around the front, stroking those back with every wrap I take. And I'm going to build up behind the bead some of this teased out dubbing to form the legs. Get all that stroked back so we can get a nice tight wrap on there to secure that. And we'll snip off all of our excess. So right now, looking like a little bit of a mess, but that's kind of what you want with these. So we'll tease some of this to the side. We'll pull our wing case over, and before I secure it, I'm going to slip my fingers in here, stroke everything back, lay the wing case down. That'll control and tame all of those loose fibers. Get that wrapped. Fold my tinsel over. Get that wrapped. And now it's just a matter of securing everything. So we'll get a couple of real nice tight wraps. Get that secured, fold that back. Get my thread working in behind all that. I like to snip this off close with a razor blade, but you got to be really careful because obviously you don't want to cut into your wing case and ruin all that. But that's why it pays to work sharp. Nice new razor blade will go through that like nothing. And that is pretty much it. If there's some space in there, you can put a little bit of extra thread on there to fill that in, but that is pretty good. I'm going to tease that back. I'm going to get the thread tucked in behind the bead again with the whip finish. Now, I'm not a head cement guy. I very rarely, if ever, use head cement. This is the one fly that it could actually be beneficial to use head cement. I don't think head cement adds any durability. I really don't. I know a lot of people think that it does, but I think that head cement really does nothing other than gloss up a visible head. I don't really think it adds a whole lot to the actual durability. But on this fly, if you fill this gap in too much and you're leaving thread on top of the bead, that knot really doesn't have anything to sink down into, so some head cement there could potentially help. It's one of the few flies where I actually will use a little bit of it. But all right, so there's that. Get that as tight as I can. You can slip some head cement in there if you want to. Doesn't really matter. But we're going to come in here and we're going to snip off the thread. Tease some of that down. And, you know, regardless of how it looks when you're done tying it, how messy it is, doesn't really matter, because when this thing gets wet and soaks up water, it's going to look really, really super buggy. Very, very, very popular fly. I mean, you know, if you do any bit of fly fishing, it's going to be highly unlikely that you don't know what a hare's ear is, but, you know, they're tied a lot of different ways. And this is a way to tie it that I think is the best of all worlds. Gives you the nice bugginess of a hare's ear, everything that you would normally want, but it also incorporates some other aspects of a mayfly nymph that we usually tie. A little bit of a tighter body down here, less bushy of a tail. So it includes the best of all worlds, I think. One of my primary flies, hell of a fish catcher, and I just wanted to share how I tie it. So obviously you can take it and switch it however you'd like. You know, I've got the option of refilming the entire video, but I don't think I'm going to do that. If you hear my dog barking in the background, sometimes that'll happen. So no biggie. All right, if you have any questions or anything, just leave them in the comments, but that's my take on a hare's ear, and hopefully it'll catch some fish for you.